We are live.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everybody on the committee, and good morning to our public who's joining us. I want to call the meeting to order for October 8th of 2020, and meeting of the Policy Review Committee. And we will start with a roll call.
Chair Brown.
Here.
Board Member Cole. Dr. Pierce.
Present.
Ms. Beasley. Ms. Klein.
Present.
Ms. Ellingson.
Here.
Mr. Holt. Ms. White.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Why don't we first entertain the minutes from the last meeting? We need to approve those.
I motion to approve the meeting minutes from last meeting.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion, corrections? Thank you. All approved?
Aye. Aye. Are you calling the vote?
Just calling for. Any opposed? Motion's passed. Moving on to the revisions that we have for today to consider.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
we have our deputy legal counsel with us today, and she has a hearing yet this morning. So I was hoping we could tackle 5230 and 5000 first, so that she can get to her hearing today.
Of
And
course.
I appreciate that, but there's been a change in my schedule. So I am certainly available the entire hour. So if it works better not to change the schedule, that certainly is fine. But thank you.
I believe it still makes some sense to change the order of these. I know we've got Jimmy Beal here pertaining to one of those, and this way she'd be able to leave if she'd like to, and she's welcome to stay. Why don't we address policy 5000? Dr. Raj?
Thank you. I'm pulling it up right now. And we have some wonderful guests here with us today. We have both Jimmy Beal, who is one of our amazing resource counselors. I think primarily for the middle school, but she certainly lends a hand in other areas, and she really is our coordinator for students who are transgender or gender nonconforming. And I know she does a number of other wonderful things too. I'll let her kind of do a better intro than I'm doing. And then we have Wanda Lillis, who's our deputy legal counsel, here to talk about this today. As I referenced before in the brief memo that I had sent, really this policy came about is we have a number of, I think, students who would like to have their preferred name used. In some further review, it seemed, I'm sure that legal or Ms. Beal will stop me if I go off too far, that upon further review, that really we should have a policy in place to allow for such a process. What we've been doing since really for the last several years, both during the course of when there was a Dear Colleague letter from the Office of Civil Rights, and then post rescission of that letter as well, I've been handling these matters on a case-by-case basis, and I think you'll see that reflected really in the policy, that we really are going to continue to work on that on a case-by-case basis. But there is a very important piece to this policy, which is the name, using the preferred name, preferred gender. For official records, our understanding is that we will have to continue to use the legal name and legal gender for reporting purposes to the department, to the U.S. Department of Education, State Department of Education. And those items would also have to appear on official legal documents, such as the transcript. However, on more unofficial records, I guess, for lack of a better term, and that's the definition we chose to use here in the policy, such as like a class roster that would be used. The student's preferred name and preferred gender would be made available. There's a reference to the High School Athletic Association as far as athletics, that we will follow their particular policy as a member of that organization. And then in other areas such as facilities and restrooms, we will continue to handle those on a case-by-case basis based on the needs of the students and based on the layout of the facilities, et cetera. And so with that, I'm sure, I know we had a group of folks that really met and did a great job in putting this policy together. I'll go ahead and Ms. Beal or Ms. Lillis, if you'd like to kind of fill in any gaps and give a little bit more information, the floor is yours, if that's fine with the chair.
Absolutely.
Sure. So I appreciate that, Dr. Roush, and Dr. Roush's comments were certainly accurate. And so just to put a little bit of a time frame on this, as he mentioned, the guidance came out from the U.S. Department of Justice and U.S. Department of Education in May of 2016, which was very much in support of transgender and gender nonconforming students. And so at that point in time, the district did in fact move forward with setting up a transgender support team, is actually what we were calling it, which certainly was headed by Jimmy Beal and then also other staff members within the building. And each year I would send out a reminder to building administrators that in fact that support team was available to provide assistance and guidance with certainly any student or parent who raised the issue around those kinds of issues. And so along with that, as also Dr. Roush mentioned, we as a district and as a committee created a name and gender change request form. And basically that gave students and parents the opportunity to request that their unofficial records, shall we say, were actually listed as in their preferred name. And so obviously Infinite Campus is our electronic database that allows us to track names, track records. And so we were able to certainly make some changes within that program. That all went very well until we were having a meeting in December of 2019. And at that point, through our discussions, it appeared that there may have been some miscommunication, misinformation, or certainly concern about the name that some documents were being reported in, whether it was the legal name or the unofficial name. And so at that point, quite honestly, I suggested that we kind of put a moratorium on the name change form until we could look into the issue further and create some kind of board policy. Because in my research of other districts across the country, what I frequently found in researching this issue is that other districts had official board policy, which obviously is a sanction by the board representing that, this is the action that they choose to take. So as Dr. Roush had mentioned, we looked at sample policies from Neola and various other districts. And so then I put together what I believe to be the most critical pieces and created the draft policy that you have in front of you. Should also be noted that we have an active committee working on the administrative guidelines. We are hoping that those can be finished by mid-November, and those certainly will provide more information in terms of the process that we will be asking administrators and others to follow regarding this name change and making any kind of changes to Infinite Campus. So certainly I'm welcome to answer any kind of questions, or if Jimmy has anything else to add, I certainly would ask her to share as well.
The the piece that I would share is that this came about really at the request of students. We met with students from several high schools across the district and heard their stories, with regard to their gender identity. And it was troubling, to say the least, because students present as they identify. So if they view themselves as male, if they identify as male, they present as male. And the struggle for them was that they'd go into a class and there might be a substitute teacher who would call roll and call a female name, and the student who is seen as a male, identifies as a male, looks very male, is having to answer, to a female name, and that involves usually having to explain in detail, because as soon as the student, let's say the name was Jessica, as soon as he would say, "I'm Jessica," then the substitute teacher would, say, "You're not Jessica, sit down. Why are you standing up? Why are you playing me like that?" Because they're sub. And it was, cognitive dissonance at its finest. So students really were asking for something that would make things a little easier for them. The other part was going into a restroom, because people would look at them and try to argue with them about what restroom to go into. So it was really a struggle for them. And we heard that. It isn't a ton of cases, but it's enough that kids shouldn't have to try to, help educate all the staff in a building or all the students in a building just to go to school and be themselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Roush, anything else that you have arranged for presentation?
That is all.
Good. Who would like to
I have some thoughts.
ask the first question?
Emily White here. Thank you guys for putting this together. I think this is really, really so important. And this can be like literally a life-saving policy for some of our students, especially when we think about students like Leela Alcorn and other stories like that. So I really appreciate the care that's been put into this policy and making this a priority. There are three suggestions, I guess, I have about the draft that we have. One is I would suggest that we expressly include language about dress codes. A lot of this is based on facilities, but we also have schools in our district that have gender-based dress codes. And I think that we should just include a line saying, the gender that the student identifies will also correspond with which dress code they must comply with, although it might be a time to reconsider why we have different requirements at some schools for students based on gender in the first place. The second one is knowing that the harassment potential and experience is there. I think it might make sense to expressly incorporate by reference our existing gender-based harassment policies and what the procedure is to make a complaint so that a student can be safe at school. I don't think that we should rewrite a special one for our trans students, but I think that we should incorporate it by reference in this policy. The only other piece that I have some thoughts on is what I like about the policy is that it starts from a position that the student will be treated equally with other students based on their gender identity, and it's not one that starts from the proposition that a student should be treated differently, that they should be segregated, that they should have to go to a private bathroom when all of their other classmates are going to a different bathroom. But there is a piece that leaves open the possibility that a student could be denied that opportunity based on the privacy interests of other students. And I would recommend that maybe we put something in there saying if another student really has an issue with where another student is using the bathroom, that maybe they should be the ones to use a different facility or bathroom or time if they have some sort of legitimate reason for that feeling, rather than treating our trans students differently because another student has an issue with their with the other student's gender.
Thank you. Thank you. Any thoughts about those three suggestions? Any comments?
Question from Ms. White. If we were to do the incorporation for the harassment policy and the in a reference to the dress code policies that we have, is there a particular portion of this policy you envision that taking place, or would we simply and I'll
Sure,
show you here, or would we simply hit this cross-reference tab and just hit the policies that we cross-reference just to make it there?
I think harassment is important enough that it should be a separate subheading, but then it should cross-reference to it. So I think that, you know, up top, we already have this commitment that we're not going to discriminate and that we're going to have a safe, supportive, equitable environment. So I think it should be almost like a remedy piece, which usually goes towards the end of the policy. You would have a separate subheading and say, you know, harassment is not going to be tolerated and it's going to be addressed. And here's the procedure to make a complaint, and we, you know, encourage you to do so if there's an issue, just to incorporate that by reference there. On dress codes, I think that it might be possible to rework the facilities title to maybe say, you know, facilities and other school policies, and then just include a line in there saying and dress codes.
I agree that I think those are all very good suggestions. Certainly the dress code issue is one that we've dealt with before. I've had many principals contact me, and so my response has generally been, we look at dress code without respect to gender. That's been the approach certainly that we've tried to take. For example, if you have a male show up at school in a dress, that's perfectly acceptable. The dress code does talk about relating to, for example, not causing a major disruption in the building. So if a male wants to show up in a dress, that's fine. But if that dress is way too short and that wouldn't be acceptable for either gender, then they're still going to apply that same dress code. One of the areas that has come up in, and I appreciate your comment as well, has come up at graduation. Yeah. I believe there were in the past, I believe there could still be some schools that say males wear white robes, females wear blue robes, or whatever the case may be. And so certainly we can be cognizant of that. We've tried in the past to address that issue and say, don't do it by gender. You know, do it by name, do it by row, do it by whatever, but certainly not by gender. I'll also add as an aside, this has come up, it's a little different this year, but certainly we've had this similar kind of issue come up with like homecoming king and queen, and how do we handle that? And quite honestly, my suggestion has often been just simply have a homecoming court. If you want to continue that practice, it's just a court and it's not divided by male or female. It's just students. So we try to address some of those issues, but I certainly appreciate the comments. I think they're good ones. And certainly I agree, dress code is certainly something that we need to have in there as well.
And if I may, I really appreciate Ms. White's comment about if it causes you know, an uncomfortable situation for other students or whatever, in part because given the current climate across our nation, there's this a hesitancy on my part to give any kind of latitude or open door to the opportunity for blatant discrimination. And that particular rationale about it makes me uncomfortable or whatever has been used previously with other marginalized groups as a way of segregating, separating, othering and kind of pushing away other marginalized groups. And I think we've got to steer away from that language where it makes, the whole comfort piece, in part because there are other solutions. If it makes you uncomfortable, just as you said, well, then there are other bathrooms that you could use, or we could have some more training so that, people are more knowledgeable and more comfortable as a result. But I definitely appreciate you bringing that piece up, because we've seen that used historically to really, segregate and marginalize others. And it would be great to avoid language that gives us that as a possibility.
I have a question for, I think it was Miss Lillis who was speaking earlier, or was it someone else? I couldn't see. But
It probably was me, Mr. Cole.
okay. Good morning, all. My first question is relative to the portion of the policy that talks about our building leader being able to address these situations on a private student for student basis and confidentially. Facility accessibility for transgender and GNC students. Building principals will work with students and parents, guardians on a private, confidential, individual basis. How has this been exercised and how is it working right now? Because quite honestly, I think that is the most appropriate way in which to address this type of situation, to give that space based on training, based on information, the opportunity for the building leader to address effectively. Working with the family, working with the student directly, and building a culture and climate within the building that is accessible and understanding. And oddly enough, I think a lot of our students really are anyway, based on what I've seen, whether it's in our buildings or even buildings I've previously taught in. But I just wanted to get an idea of how the building principal or administrative leadership in a building addresses this issue. Was there any feedback on that?
Yes, so we have had the transgender support team, and I believe it's now called the diversity support team, for the past 4 years. And so the idea of that support team is almost like a mobile group to kind of go around, again, led by Jimmy. But I think from the beginning, we acknowledge that there may be principals, there may be administrators, there may be other staff members that are not comfortable with the topic, or maybe feel like they're not well versed on the topic. And so the idea with the support team is that we could send a group of individuals, maybe school psychologist, maybe a nurse, maybe a counselor, might be from outside of the building, but someone who could support and lead that internal building group through this process. And that's why, certainly case by case, because, and as Jimmy well knows, sometimes there are requests of a student or of a family that might not be what the building administration expects. We want to make sure that the student is having their needs met, and that the building administrator or anyone else in the district is not imposing any kind of restriction. So we want it to be a very interactive process, which is why you both in the policy and in the guidelines, you're going to see a lot of information that talks about on a case-by-case basis, but that the intent there is really to give us the most flexibility to handle these situations as the student and parent want to see them handled, and obviously in conjunction with the administration.
And I thank you for that. My other question is relative to, because this is a very interesting point and understandably incredibly controversial. It is not as simple as, to me, go to another bathroom. I'll share a personal story. I am a father of 2 daughters, and on the occasions where they experienced for the first time their menstrual cycles, I was the one who showed up on the scene to the school to help address that issue. At the time, my wife was working and kind of bogged down with that, had a very tight schedule. So mine was a little looser, and I showed up to provide that level of support. This is one of the most, in part embarrassing, emotional times that I've ever seen both of my children experience as girls becoming physically young women. So when I think about this, and I think about this bathroom use and the types of things that actually take place, particularly for our girls, it's just, I want us to be able to take into account, other student needs as well. I want to be as sensitive, as aware, as mindful to our transgender students as I possibly can. But I just don't think in certain situations it's as easy as, just find another bathroom. So I wanted to raise that as a potential issue. In addition to that, I would say that possibly a solution is, if we're just going to go ahead and, functionally practice with bathrooms being, co-ed, why not just do it? But again, there is that issue of, that female privacy aspect of things. And I'm sure some boys feel indifferent about certain things too. But it's just something that I think deserves a little more education and a little more discussion. But I thank you for bringing that up and for sharing with us how these teams come into our schools to assist the culture and climate. I think that's important.
Could I speak to a little piece of that? From my experience historically within the district and working in different buildings with different groups of people, I totally understand kind of the hesitation and concern. Absolutely. What we did when we first started this several years ago was kind of looked at the building on a case-by-case basis, because of course they're each very different as well, and looked to see, was there a way to create a gender neutral bathroom? For example, like you have in the malls, the family bathroom where either anybody could really use it. It's not delineated based on gender. So we looked at buildings, and our facilities people were fabulous at, helping us kind of brainstorm the building and what was available, what could be modified very easily without, a lot of cost, and then just make that restroom available to whomever wanted it. I taught kinder for 4-year-olds all the way through college. And at various grade levels I've taught, there have been kids who didn't want to go in a restroom with stalls for a variety of reasons and would have preferred to have the option of just an individual restroom. So it kind of being able to offer that really solved a lot of problems for a whole lot of kids, including ones who just weren't comfortable going in a large space with a bunch of stalls. So we've been very diligent to work with the building, work with the principal, work with the team, find out what the concerns are. And in a lot of cases, it's kind of amazing that the whole thing was just solved by kids. Like, really, the whole thing was solved by kids and running smoothly before the team even got involved. So it's really a kind of amazing process when adults stand back and watch what kids will take care of and handle.
Thank you, Jimmy, for that. Could I please just jump in to add some things? So one, I appreciate this conversation. Again, I think as a servant leader, one thing that is important to me is having conversation and dialogue so we can come to a common understanding. So I appreciate the fact that we are talking about this matter, that this policy is actually before us this morning. I thank our team that worked on this policy. It aligns very well with our efforts to move towards being an equitable district. With that being said, I also like to add that Board Member Beckerly and I spent quite a bit of time with Kaleidoscope here recently to work on our strategic plan. And I just want to share with you all some of the things that we learned in having that conversation with them. And the first thing was really that teachers need a support network. Administrators need a support network. They express that they are not experts, they're not versed in a lot of the issues that our transgender, our LGBTQA plus community are having. They're unaware of the language, they're unaware of the resources. And so we as a district do need to ensure that we are providing them with a support system that is plugged into those resources, well aware of those resources, and aware of methodologies, approaches, models to engage our students that are in the LGBTQA plus community. There was also specific reference during the conversation given to restrooms. Restrooms, beyond the fact of where do we go to simply relieve ourselves, but restrooms in the fact that some of, as Committee Member White said, some of the violence and harassment towards our LGBTQ plus students happens in restrooms outside of the sight and view of teachers and administrators. And so the fact that there's a lack of non-gender restrooms makes it very difficult for our LGBTQ plus A students to relieve themselves, to feel safe at school, and to have, again, just comfortable spaces when we talk about that climate and culture. Jimmy, I can't applaud you enough for continuing to champion our students in this space, our staff in this space. But one of the things that was also brought up in the conversation was that our district assumes that Jimmy is enough. Jimmy needs help. Jimmy needs more people. There's a whole support network out there for her. And so as we're having this conversation, my heart is warm because we're talking through a lot of these same issues that were brought to the forefront. But I want to challenge us to go further and really address a lot of these critical issues that Kaleidoscope brought to us, to ensure that this policy is a starting point for us to really solidify and establish a district-wide support system, for us to establish and move forward to get Jimmy some more help, for us to establish and move forward to get more professional development for our administrators and teachers around the issues affecting our LGBTQA students, plus students. That PD is so critically important because it's not so much about here's the differences or the distinctions. It's more about creating a building space, creating a community in which everybody belongs. It's, again, helping people understand the common understandings that we have, what we have in common, our value systems as a district. And so, again, I want to just put that out there and ground us in that, and then knowing that the goal of those policies, the goal of those trainings are to create a culture, a climate in which all belong and feel that they belong and know that they belong. So, thank you.
Thank you. Phil?
Thank you, Chair Brown. I do want to point out that that Jimmy is a Helen Jenkins Davis Award winner from the Columbus Education Association several years ago and has been engaged in this activism for many years. When I was in the classroom, I remember when we received our first transgender student, I can't remember if Jimmy came out, but we got the grade level, we got the staff together and we explained, okay, this is the plan and here's how it's going to go. And it's more than just bathrooms. It's much more than just bathrooms. And what I like about this policy is that it is on a case-by-case basis. And, you know, if you look at, there are schools that are inherent safe spaces. I think one of the schools that I have had the privilege of being in when we were able to go in them, Columbus Gifted Academy is very much a safe space. And I really want to point out to everyone that our trans students, specifically our trans students of color, or gender non-conforming students of color, no one said this, suffer attempt suicide at a higher rate, exponentially higher than those of their cisgender peers. And so it is about a safe space, and that professional development is important, and that professional development takes time. But I am very proud to see that we have this policy on deck to address and set some guidelines for our students and to help inform our staff. And that PD is crucial. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Let's see. Dr. Blue.
Yes. So thank you for lifting that piece about the students of color who also fall into this category. They are often overlooked when we're talking kind of in general terms about LGBTQIA plus students. And so I appreciate you mentioning that, Mr. Hayes. And also I wanted to just say, speaking to Dr. Pierce's point is I 100% agree. And I think that what we're going to be able to do as the strategic plan piece moves forward and we're building out the equity work for my department, this is definitely a part of it. It's very important to me to be able to help train teachers and staff, not just on processes, but on that building climate piece. And so kind of bringing it all together in how our support of and treatment of this vulnerable group of students falls into the other things that we talk about when we talk about equity in terms of our biases and examining our own values and things like that. So please be assured that that is at the top of the priority list when I think about building out an equity plan and strategy, is the support and the training and professional development, and also, you know, thinking about multiple points of entry for that professional development, understanding that different people are going to need different types of information, and just having those resources and supports available so that we can make the adults in our buildings feel more comfortable in providing that support.
Yeah, thank you. That's good to hear. Very good to hear. And this area does need more focus and more thought and more conversation. I think that, and I don't know and don't want to be the one to add to your workload in your new department dealing with equity, but to some extent, if you've got some thoughts on how to provide more help to the work that Jimmy's doing, I agree with Dr. Pierce that as wonderful as she is, Jimmy could use additional help, and we do need more counselors probably who can work in this area. I've got a couple of other items with policy that I want to just put on the table along with, you know, what's out there right now. First is a question, and that is in the title of the policy and the use of the term non-conforming students. That just strikes me as not the best way to describe people as non-conforming. Although there may be some who like that, who choose to be openly non-conforming. My question is, does that strike anybody else as really an unhelpful term, and is there a better term? The second question pertains to coverage. I know this policy pertains specifically to students. Do we need to address these issues in a policy that pertains to adults, as in employees, teachers, staff, and administrators? Third item, very specifically in the policy, under records and references, the last paragraph that talks about unofficial records, the last sentence or the last phrase doesn't seem to make sense to me. Where it says students shall be addressed or referred to by the pronouns associated with the identified gender, that makes sense. Or by a preferred pronoun. But to say that transgender boys shall be referred to using he, his, him, kind of is the opposite of what we're trying to do with allowing preferred terms to be used. So with those three items also things to discuss, let's continue the discussion. Who's next?
Mr. Brown, I would like to comment if I could. One of the very early issues that I raised with Dr. Roush is the term gender nonconforming students. I completely agree with you. It just seems a little unusual from my perspective. It suggests that you have to conform. And that's certainly not what we're trying to do. And I said, I wasn't, through research, I wasn't able to find a better term. At our last meeting, I raised it again. Jimmy and I had a discussion about it as well. And I have included now, there was not previously a definition of gender nonconforming. So I did add one to the policy. I'm gonna let Jimmy chime in because we had this conversation no less than a week ago. I agree with you that it sounds a bit unusual.
So if you look at national transgender organizations, transgender advocacy, support, political, whatever they are, that, because they're the gamut, social, political, and all that, educational. They'll use terms like gender expansive, gender creative. Gender creative was one of the terms that professor at OSU uses regularly, and she does a lot of work with teens around who are LGBTQIA, and as well, gender questioning. So she used the term gender creative. She used the term gender expansive. I think in either Boston or New York City, they've used gender expansive in their policies, because you're absolutely right. Non-conforming sends a real, negative message about their identity. And the last thing, we want is to put on people expectations that they conform or what, they're outside the mainstream. So I completely agree with you. What I can do is pull a list of all the terms I've come across and put them out there to you guys to see what you think.
And,
Um,
and that was my hope, was that this committee would be able to really, because Juan and I had that conversation too, and we're both like, there's a lot of terms. What's the best term? What's the most appropriate term? I think Jimmy said you rattled off about 5 or 6 different terms that we certainly could use. I guess the question is to the committee: do we want to wordsmith the policy now? Do we want to take it? Do we want Jimmy to come back with some suggestions on changing the term gender nonconforming? Is there a preference based on what she's shared today, whether gender creative, gender expansive?
If you've not yet looked at the chat box, Joellen has kindly provided a list of suggestions.
I will say that it happens to be the case in working with some organizations that are intentional about their focus on especially young people within the LGBTQIA+ community, especially those of color, that gender nonconforming is a term that they use. So that said, if the committee would like to move past it, that's fine. I think something that is commonly used by the populations we're concerned with this morning is also non-binary. So I haven't really heard anyone use gender expansive. But again, I don't have a very strong preference on that. But Chair Brown, I wanted to go back to one point you made earlier. I was focusing in on those pronouns mentioned in the policy. Just quickly, Jimmy, I think you were the one that raised it earlier, but I really love that you said that the adults are making this a pretty intense conversation and the kids are solving it. So
Yep.
I love the idea of continuing to honor their voice and their direction that they set for us and how we solve this. So I would just say that the policy in the pronoun section is the one place where I think we don't really honor that, because just as we're talking about gender nonconforming or non-binary, in this section, we're prescribing binary pronouns. They're actually non-binary pronouns that people use. The most obvious ones being they, them. So I would love to see that section expanded because there are people who, when they identify as trans or otherwise, or as questioning, that they reflect that middle ground and that questioning with a non-binary pronoun. So we should not force those binary pronouns on those individuals.
That's an excellent point. And it has become a matter of pragmatics. So several years ago, we had a couple of students at a high school who wanted to, at different high schools actually, who wanted to be able to use the pronouns them, they, their. And the struggle was very much just pragmatic. We didn't have a student information system that provided that as an option. And of course, the judge and I go way back because I've been in advocacy for a long time. So I think, okay, well, let's change it then. That's just my, easy solution to it. We'll just change that. So we did go to, IT people and said, is it possible? And, they went back to the people who put together the student information system. And of course, they're not thinking that that's not something that they've delved into as far as their programming. So it really only became binary because it was kind of forced on us in that process of how do you track data, that student information system. But absolutely, I totally agree with you. And if we could, find a way to move beyond that, that would be fabulous because colleges are doing it. We've seen on websites, on the Common App, and different places where colleges are saying, as far as pronouns go, you know, here's what I use. And it includes we or them or they, or it includes other. And so I think the possibility is out there. You know, being able to align with some of that, it would be a fabulous thing.
I would,
Oh,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say, I would support the change that Eric made. I was going to suggest that we keep the first sentence and just take the second sentence out in its entirety. It may not address the they, them issue, but you know, I agree. It doesn't then set a specific tone in the policy.
And to your point about students and their voice, another possibility, and I'm real good with this one, is let's ask the kids. So there are several, you know, diversity groups across the district. We have several GSAs or SAGA groups across the district. It would be very easy to put together a Google form, send it out to them, you know, in one of their meetings, have kids fill out this piece of it and get their input on some of it. Because when it comes to some of these, they're shaped often by kind of the culture as well as where it's coming from. So gender queer, for example, I hear that a lot in the academic world as they reclaim words that have been used to stigmatize or marginalize, you know, in a positive way. So, but I don't hear gender queer necessarily from students. And I have a lot of, I've talked to a lot of friends of color about the term queer in general who say, I would never use that to identify myself. So I think asking kids is the best, that's a great way to do it.
I like the idea of getting additional student input and of asking kids. Be good, I think, to go ahead and devise a way to get that input. Obviously, making sure that they realize what their role in this process is, sharing their thoughts and their experiences, but not dictating a policy.
No, absolutely.
Right. Some other thoughts.
This is Dion Blue. I just thinking about what Jimmy just said, it made me wonder. I wanted to ask specifically Dr. Pierce, do you think it would help our gender support, diversity support committee to also talk to Kaleidoscope just to get a different cultural view of the policy?
I think it would help extremely, very, very much. And I also think that that would be a great first step in terms of, with you being in this position, establishing a collaborative working relationship with them. I think they would appreciate us reaching out and seeing them as a support on this matter. And I think it would further, you know, solidify your commitment to hit the ground running, making those relationships. So yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, and I don't want to get carried away with the idea, but there are several other groups out there that would probably appreciate being asked for their thoughts, and they might provide some good ideas. I'm talking about Stonewall Union, HRC, Equality Ohio. I don't know. Anybody have thoughts about doing that?
I guess, Chair Brown, I would just again reiterate that there's already an open door there because Board Member Beckerly and I met with them as a part of the strategic plan. They've been listed as one of those organizations, and their work specifically aligns with young people. They're currently working in some of our schools, not in all of our schools, so they are already poised and positioned to lean into this policy.
There's another fairly new community organization that deals specifically with trans people across the Columbus and Greater Columbus area, and that's Mosaic. So I think they're another great group, specifically since they deal with trans and gender creative people. I think you'd get a really good perspective touching base with them. And I think they're fairly close to, they're up on Indianola, so they're really close to like Hudson and
Chair Brown, to your suggestions, I just would say the point is to get kids in the room, not to talk to the adults necessarily. So I just, the groups that you mentioned are well-known advocacy organizations, but I don't know to what extent they have that youth network. So, but if they do, or if you make that invitation to them, I think it would just be helpful to be explicit that we're trying to hear directly from the population that is concerned with this policy. So if, in so much as they're able to help us connect, then they should claim those seats at the table.
One piece I am curious about for some of the advocacy groups that might have our alums is how easy is it to get transcripts and official records changed when the name change comes later? It looks like our policy encompasses that, but I just wonder how user-friendly that process is on the ground. And that might be a specific topic of conversation in a piece where, you know, possibly having a form, if we don't have already, it might be good to get feedback on that point.
And we've had that initial conversation in one of our last meetings. And so as you'll see, a transcript is noted as an official record, because obviously that's the record that is can be shared and sent out to others. The concern is this is not a legal name change. So obviously these individuals have not gone through the court. The transcript is the official record. So there is concern about, to date, I can tell you, we've not gone back and changed any transcripts because those are official records. We did discuss it briefly at the last meeting. I was looking at some information that was shared from a FERPA perspective.
Yeah.
And so I'll continue looking into that. But my concern is once these students leave the district, and the issue I'm looking at is whether FERPA would continue to control, which would allow them to then come back and change any records or request the change of any records that they see as being inaccurate or misleading. So we're still looking into that issue. But I think from a legal perspective, it's one I'm going to look at very closely.
I think that one really should be a priority given the importance of these educational records. I mean, this might be a barrier to a student enrolling at a university and getting a job and sharing those transcripts. And there are many other official records like birth certificates that are routinely changed once the name change happens. So while I also looked at the FERPA stuff and just thought that sets the floor, but it doesn't necessarily set the ceiling for how inclusive and welcoming our students can be. And I could just see how that could be a huge barrier if all of your educational records are in a misgendered name. Having a process, if we can, correct those records after an official name change, that would be great. And I think that it could potentially be encompassed by the policy because, as you point out, it does make that important legal distinction between the official records and the unofficial records. So if we can work to make both ends of that policy more equitable, that seems like it would be a good thing.
Certainly.
And if I could, I wanted to go back to one other thing that the judge had said, and that was about a question about the need for a policy for adults as well. And I would highly recommend that. Some of the calls I've gotten over the years actually came, in conjunction with CEA and staff members. So we've had in our district trans staff members, and they have not always had a welcoming environment, let me just say. And part of it, I think, was the lack of anything specific. Like, we had non-discrimination policies, but until they start to be kind of, and I know Wanda and I've had this conversation, they need to be broad, they absolutely do. But sometimes if they're too broad, people think, oh, well, no, that doesn't apply over here, when in fact it should apply over there. So trans staff have often felt like they weren't covered, like they weren't addressed or protected because it didn't deal with it specifically. So I agree completely. If there was a way, even a line or two that is specific, it provides this real sense of protection.
Thank you. Thank you. Phil?
Thank you, Chair Brown. So I just have a quick question, and you don't have to tell me how it works, just if it's baked into the policy. Oftentimes, our members are approached by students who indicate that they are trans and have not told their families, or their families know and are not supportive. And I know that this is a team approach, it's a case-by-case basis approach, but within this policy, it talks about working with the student and their family. I guess my question would be, and it's a yes or no question, are there provisions within the policy, or how we do things under the policy now, even though there's not a policy yet, that don't put the teacher in the middle of the situation while respecting both sides of the issue, in that how the student identifies, as well as the custodial parents, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, custodial parents' views about the matter, without placing staff in the middle and stepping on both landmines, if that makes sense.
I understand. Does anybody have a suggestion?
If I may, I'm not necessarily looking for how that works, just
Yeah.
simply is that within the context of this policy, or within our current practice, that we're able to make sure that we respect both sides of the coin without putting anyone in the middle.
If I can just chime in very quickly, to me, this merits in that type of a situation. I don't believe that a teacher should place themselves in between a student and a family. I think that that's where those supports that we additionally offer in the district become germane. I think that's where that point of entry for involvement with our emotional and some emotional support services play a role and try and assist that student. At the end of the day, what we want to be able to do with Columbus City Schools, as I see it, and this is Michael, as I see it, again, ensure that there's fairness, ensure that there is a level of comfort and safety and equity that is involved in the life of that student while they're within our four walls, while they're on our student grounds, including a school bus. So I think the other supports come where, if there is need for that type of conversation to happen, I don't think that the teacher should be that middleman, if you will, or middle person addressing that issue, unless there was some sort of unique relationship there, but I just don't see that.
Board Member Brown, let me just, Clay, let me say this. Not that our people are putting themselves in this situation, right? But if I am, if I'm presenting as female and I want to be called Michelle, my parents know and are not supportive of me, and they call the teacher, and I've said to the teacher, when I'm presenting as female, I want you to call me Michelle. But the parents have conversations with the teacher, say, you are not to call him Michelle. You are to call him Phil, That's what I'm speaking about. And just making sure that there is that baked into this so that we can, you know, because there are two different views on how the student identifies themselves. And it is a tightrope between the two for our staff. And we want to do what's the right thing without running afoul of either party in this situation. That's what I meant. That's it.
No, yeah, I understand that. And it's not easy. How do we handle that now?
So Mr. Cole is absolutely correct. Usually in those situations, they'll call over and ask for additional support or ask for, you know, me to come in and meet with the family or meet with the student and the parents. Usually there's a counselor or social worker involved in it as well at the building level. So there are people familiar with the student and parents already. And then it's really just, from my perspective, a lot of listening and trying to educate along the way. So you find the common ground, which was what somebody had talked about earlier, and that is the student. We care about the student, we love the student, we want to support the student, and parents feel the same way. That's their child. They absolutely love them, they want to support them, and often there's a lot of angst going on in them because they already recognize that the student is finding their own way and becoming a person that they didn't expect. It's, you know, as our kids grow, that's what happens. So it's kind of a grappling with and coming to grips with it. But having some data on, student, the rate of suicide, the rate of mental health concerns, the rate of substance abuse with regard to this population in particular really helps, because what we don't want is a student to feel like they have no options. Just like somebody mentioned, Leah Alcorn out of Cincinnati, they have no options. They're totally distraught and they walk in front of a truck on I-70. That's what we don't want, and parents don't want that either. So the other piece is in my work in doing this, I have a handful of parents whose children went to Columbus City School, who also transitioned, are now adults, and those parents have volunteered their experience, volunteered to come in and share or talk to or listen to. They're willing to put together like a support group for parents so that parents have somebody that they can tap when they're facing, situations and aren't sure what to do with that, how to navigate it. There's a lady in particular who is an African-American woman, an ordained minister, and her child is now an adult, 32, has children already, but went through this. And she said, I realized when my student was about, 11 or 12 years old, that I was either going to have a live son or a dead daughter, and the choice was going to be mine. So, having someone else who has grappled, who's come to grips with it and figured it out, not that it was easy. I think that support for other parents would be invaluable. But you're absolutely right, Representative Cole. That's where we come in, is to be able to bring additional resources, some, information, share that. The one that comes to mind that I think speaks to how this kind of expands is because it's not often only the issue of the gender identity. Usually there are other dynamics going on. But I had a principal call me because both parents were in a custody battle, and the one parent was supportive of the student as trans and the other parent was not. So they were going at the principal like, and yet it was a custody battle. So it made it all the more complicated and convoluted. But yes.
All right. Thank you. Seeing the time, and we are approaching 10 o'clock, our hard stop time. Obviously, we're not going to get this completed today, nor will we reach any of the other 4 policies that are before us for review. I think it makes sense to wrap up on this, but make sure that we've got a clear direction of next steps with respect to the development of this policy. I do have one additional question, and if anybody else has any other time we move forward, now's the time. Question I think is really for Wanda, and that is in official records, where we're going to go with the official name, the official legal name of the student. Can we also add reference to the preferred name and identity if the student chooses that? And it might make things easier for that student later on when using those documents, so that they don't have to give a lengthy explanation of why their name doesn't match the one on those documents, such as transcript. But any thoughts on that?
Sure. So I don't see any difficulty with that. Dare I say the limitation is probably based on the form, which is never going to stop us from doing what we need to do. My thought was potentially to put that name in parentheses. We've also thought about, for example, in Infinite Campus, there is a screen. And the top of the screen says preferred name, which is where we would include the students chosen. And then below it, it says legal name. So we basically know we're never going to be changing the last name. It's always the first name. So we have thought about that as well in terms of sharing that screen when we get a request for records, so that we can demonstrate why there are 2 different names on the documents. But I don't think that there's anything that would keep us from doing that. The other thing though, and I just want to make sure that everyone is clear, and certainly what we're going to include in the guidelines and inform parents and students is that there will always be situations where we have to use the student's legal name, such as we get requests from Social Security. We have issues with Medicaid billing. Ohio High School Athletic Association has their own very specific guidelines. So it's our intent at the present to notify these families that, while we will assist in any way that we can, there will be some limitations because it's not a legal name change. And certainly the last thing that we want is for anyone to say that the district is providing misinformation to these agencies. There's no fraud going on, nothing like that. So there may be instances where we need to use the legal name.
And there may be limitations there as well with the information we send on testing and all of that to the Department of Education. I think because all of that goes through EMIS, I think we're limited by what fields they have available to report that information to.
Right. And one of the things is that we looked at is most of the reporting to ODE is done by the student's ID number. So we'll be able to send with a student ID number. We can use the preferred name because that's not what they go by, but certainly ACT, SAT, the issue has come up with those kinds of test scores as well.
Chair Brown, thank you for asking that question. It just really brought up one of the issues that we recently dealt with as a board, where the young man thought his name was one thing and legally it was another thing. So I think what I would appreciate is if Dr. Blue and Jimmy, as you all work out the administrative guidelines, can you ensure that the board has a clear understanding of how this policy will affect our practices? Thank you.
Good. One suggestion, by the way, is that in the section of the policy that deals with the official records, that we can say, at least, something like, to the extent possible, preferred name, along with the legal name. And then, we'll have to just take it item by item, but to do it wherever we can. Beyond that, I guess my question is, certainly we will bring back next draft, and there's a lot to work on. Is anybody unclear about anything we've discussed? Dr. Ross, do you have what you need on every one of the topics that's been raised?
So I'm gonna restate them to make sure that we are all clear. And if I miss something, please chime in. I have that we are going to add a statement regarding dress code. I have another change to make it very clear, do a cross-reference to our anti-harassment policies. I have in here that we're going to survey additional groups, particularly youth, additional students, as far as the proper terminology vis-a-vis gender nonconforming. I have a desire to take a look at, I think we made a change down here around the unofficial records and pronouns. So we can bring that back again and see if that's where the committee is. And then I had under official records to make a notation that to the extent possible, we'll include the preferred name, and we'll wordsmith that in there. Did I miss anything? Or do other folks have notes that I may have missed something?
Do we want to include in that anything related to staff, or does that need to be something separate? Or
I think staff needs to be something separate, because this is the policy under the student section of the policy guide. This is the 5,000 section. We really probably should develop a staff policy. Ms. Beal, I think that we can have that conversation and figure out what that should look like. I think we got a good template right here. So we'll have to pull things out that don't make sense, keep things in that make sense, and then that will be one of those policies we'll see 3 different ways, in the 1s, the 3s, and the 4,000 section, to make sure we cover all the employee groups. But I think, yes, we should have a separate policy for staff, given that this is specifically in the student section. But we can do that.
Good. Good. Does anybody have anything additional that should be considered for the next draft of this? All right. It's been a very good discussion. Thank you all. And I think that, does anybody have anything else that they want to discuss in this morning's meeting? Obviously, we're not going to get to the other pieces.
Just want to say thank you to Dr. Elf and the others who contributed to that memo. I know we talked about the additional preparation by the team, and I'm grateful for the work that was done in advance of this meeting. So just thank you for doing that.
Yes.
I too would like to say thank you for that new step in the process. I found it very informative and appreciated having that briefing that came along with all of the policies. Well, with the policy that we reviewed this morning, including the ones that we did not. While we have Dr. Blue here, I just want to take the opportunity to say, is there anything that this committee can do to help you as you acclimate, as you think about different policies, strategies that you're interested in? I know we're missing a couple of committee members, but is there anything that we need to have on our radar to just help you as you move forward to champion not just this last policy, the one that we just discussed today, but our equity policy? I think we have several other that will really fall into your area as well.
Thank you for that question. I think that probably what I'll do is work directly with Dr. Roush to kind of comb through the policy manual and see what's there. And then as we build, see what are we missing. And then I'll be able to see, kind of what assistance I might need from this group. But I definitely appreciate that, because I do think there will be even policies that are not, I'll say specifically policies that are not specifically related to equity, we're also going to probably need to take a look at. So I would just say, kind of be prepared for potentially other things that may not seem to fall under equity to kind of come back up to be asked about within a more equitable lens, if that's appropriate.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I like that too, and want to make sure you feel welcome to join us anytime. I also think it may make sense, and I don't know exactly how these are processed administratively, and I don't want to get into that much, but I'd like to see every policy that we're going to consider as it goes through the administrative vetting process to be sure to go through Dion or the Office of Equity for review and for input.
I like the idea of that too. I think that really shows from a board perspective that we're really looking at equity from a systemic sort of view. So I like that. I appreciate that.
It shall be done.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I motion that we adjourn our policy review committee. Second.
Thank you all. This has been great. Do we have a second?
Kelsey, second.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Yes.
opposed? Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Safe and
Have a
healthy.
great week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.